You know how in Photoshop you can press the tab key to hide the interface? Well, that's just one way to hide stuff. Rich tooltips, path outlines, gamut warnings, blend mode previews, the list goes on. Here's my top 10. I'm going to start with my favorite thing in all the world to turn off inside Photoshop, which are the rich tooltips. They appear in Camera Raw as well. And so if I hover over a tool, I get this big garish thing that really interrupts my ability to use the software. Even if even if you're just doing this number where you see it stays up on screen. My cursor is pretty far away now. Anyway, it doesn't really tell you anything. Look, with the lasso tool, it tells you that the keyboard shortcut is L. That's helpful, but what else is it saying? It's showing you that you can select a flower kind of randomly. Anyway, what I think a lot of us miss, though, are these videos, which can be helpful. And so just, for example, I'll click play for the object selection tool.
The object selection tool is incredibly useful.
And so it's written by the marketing department, so everything's incredibly useful. He never says, this tool's an absolute dog and don't use it. But what I love about this guy, we all have our mannerisms, of course, so I'm not making fun of him. And I like this. Watch what he does. He does a little head turn.
The object selection tool is
right at the beginning of everything he does. And sometimes it's a little more subtle and in a different direction. Watch the crop tool.
The crop tool is an incredibly useful feature.
What? It's incredibly useful again? Anyway, did you see it's a little more subtle. And
the crop tool is an incredibly useful feature.
He's looking, to his left? Anyway, he amuses me no end. And what's interesting about him, I don't know his real name, so I'm calling him Rich Tool, is he is a doppelganger for actor Nick Kroll, in case you know who that guy is. And I don't know who's the original, but one is definitely a clone. Anyway, I'm going to miss him, but I'm going to turn him off. Now, Camera Raw is a more irritating rich tooltip experience, in my opinion. I'll just go ahead and get this image and choose Camera Raw filter. And a moment later, once the thing appears on screen, I'll hover over exposure. Notice nothing comes up for an entire sentence. Did you see the delay? And then it just shows you a slider bar moving back and forth. We don't even have rich tool to amuse us here. Contrast. I'm waiting. There it is. Now we can see it, right? And all it does, it just shows a slider going back and forth. And it's like, is that what contrast? What? Anyway, I know what contrast does, right? I mean, I think you do too. So anyway, to get rid of those, go to the edit menu here on the PC. This is going to be the Photoshop menu on the Mac because these are preferences. So you drop down to preferences, higher in the menu on the Mac, and go to tools for starters. And then second checkbox down right there, show rich tooltips. If you're hardcore, you don't want any tooltips, you can turn off this thing right there. I don't like to work that way. I do like to see tooltips. I'll show you why. Now notice if I hover over the rectangular marquee tool, it just tells me, it doesn't bring up the graphic, which wasn't helpful. It just tells me what the keyboard shortcut is. So that's great. Now for Camera Raw, you have to go to a different preference. So you can't navigate around inside the dialog box, in other words. So I'll go down here, choose Camera Raw, and right there in the first panel, turn off rich tooltips, and then click OK, and the deed is done. You won't see rich tooltips anymore. Moving right along, how do you turn off unwanted tools? Starring, in my case, the frame tool, which I hate. And that's this tool right here. It duplicates the shape tools. You just don't need it. But let's see what Rich thinks. I brought him back.
The frame tool allows you to create placeholder frames.
Notice he didn't say it's an incredibly useful tool, because it's not. All right, so let's say you, like me, hate this tool. Well, what you would do, or any other tool for that matter, is you go down here, and if this doesn't work, see how it's got that weird appearance of edit toolbar there? I'll try it again. And see there, I'll click and hold and choose it. And that's going to bring up this thing right here. And I'll scroll down. You're just going to have to find the tool in question. There is no search function currently, but I'm going to grab this guy and drag him over to the extra tools. That's what you do. And then disable shortcuts for hidden tool extras, which would be the K key, which says, K doesn't even appear in there. It doesn't make any sense. And we don't need a shortcut. So I don't want to accidentally press the K key, in other words, and select the tool. Done. That's all there's to it. Tool disappears. So now we're seeing the crop tool followed by the eyedropper. We're not seeing anything in between. And if you want to get to the tool, once again, you click and hold on this guy, and then you'll see all of your hidden tools. You can hide as many tools as you like. Now for the contextual taskbar, which I'm going to suggest you want to be able to hide and show at will from the keyboard. Now, currently I have it turned off, and so I'll go up to the window menu and choose contextual taskbar, and there it is. is. And one of the great things about this item is that it offers you access to what is going to be the best new feature in Photoshop in the last decade, which is generative fill. And so let's say I make a general selection right there. Click generative fill, there it is, and enter a prompt, giant snow monster, click generate, and a moment later we have a result. If you don't like it, we've got a couple of additional variations. I think they all are terrible, but notice another use for the taskbar here is to edit text. So if I click inside this text right here with the type tool, then I'm going to see some common formatting options, and the taskbar is going to jump to right below the type, which can get a little irritating. You can, of course, pin the bar position if you want to, but I prefer to be able to hide it and show it at will. And so notice under the window menu right here, I want you to see that the layers panel by default has a keyboard shortcut of F7. I like that. And if you like working with function keys, you might want to give this guy a keyboard shortcut of F8, which is already assigned to the info panel. But the info panel, while useful, isn't that useful that you need to be able to bring it up at will. And so what I'm going to do is just escape out here, and then I'll go up to the edit menu and choose keyboard shortcuts. And now you want to twirl open the window menu right here. And then you got to scroll down a whole bunch, actually pretty much all the way to the bottom. So might as well do it. There's the contextual taskbar. Click on it. Make sure that the shortcut is active, and I'll hit the F8 key. And then, hey, that's going to take it away from window info, the info panel. If you do that, I'll just add the shortcut and click OK. That's all you have to do. And then from this point on, if I tap F8, the taskbar goes away, and then if I tap F8 again, it comes back up. And that way I can, I can use it when I want it. Wait, we've been seeing a lot of preference settings, right? Well, some preferences are controlled by this top secret file called PsUserConfig. You'll see an example at the end of this video for another that makes it so clicking outside the transform boundary does not apply the transformation. Join my Patreon, which is patreon.com/deeknow. And now back to our game of hide and show in Photoshop. Now let's talk about hiding and showing selection and path outlines. Now I know most of you already know this trick, Command or Control H, right? Gets a little trickier than that, especially when we're working with fish. So this guy comes to us from Dreamtime, by the way, link in the description. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select the object selection tool because as Rich Tool told us,
the object selection tool is incredibly useful.
it is so incredibly useful. And especially for selecting a fish like this guy right here. Did you see how quickly that happened? And as a result, we're seeing the animated selection outline around the fish. This is also known, by the way, as the marching ants. And so I could press the V key to switch to the black arrow tool and drag this guy around independently of its background. However, let's say I don't want to see the selection edges. So I'm going to undo that movement just for effect, and I'll press Command or Control H for hide. But it's a toggle. It also shows. It's still the same letter, H. But anyway, now that it's hidden, I'm going to drag this guy. It still works. So he's still selected. Things get a little more tricky, a little trickier, that is, when we add in vector-based path outline. So I'm going to turn this guy off for a moment, and I'll just go ahead and switch to the polygon tool. Ever useful tool, which is going to allow me to draw this hexagon right here. Now, normally after I release, I would see a bounding box that allows me to scale and rotate the shape. I'm not seeing it, however, and that's because it's hidden by virtue of the fish. And so I have to press Command or Control H again to bring it back, and that also brings back the selection around the fish, which is still active. So you can have all of these things active at the same time. Let's say I don't want the fish to be selected just because it's distracting after all, so I press Command or Control D. That did drop it into place, by the way, but I don't care about the fish anymore. And so now notice I can drag outside the bounding box to rotate this one guy. Now I want you to notice up here in the view menu that we have this command. There it is. That's the command we've been invoking with that keyboard shortcut. It's called extras. And that's because there's so many extras that you can show and hide, including this guy, target path. What's with that has a similar keyboard shortcut. You just add the shift key. Well, let me show you. What I'll do is a highly sophisticated Windows zoom right here, like so. And then notice we're seeing the bounding box, of course, in blue, but we're also seeing this blue outline around the hexagon itself. And so if I press Command or Control H, then I'm going to hide everything, all that extra stuff. and then press the keyboard shortcut again to bring it back. But if I just want to hide this edge right here, I'd press Command Shift or Control Shift H. Do you see the difference? So just a little extra control here inside Photoshop. Now let's talk about hiding and showing certain elements of cursors, such as the optional crosshair that you can add to the circular brush cursor, as well as the so-called precise cursors. And so I'll bring back my mountains right here, and I'll switch to the brush tool, or you can press the B key. And the brush tool is always painting in the foreground color, so I'm just going to paint a brush stroke. It's kind of a little flumpy because I'm working with the mouse, but you get the idea. Now, I like having the circular, brush preview. It's not always a circle. It could be an ellipse or some other shape, but I find that helpful. That way I know if I'm making it bigger or smaller using the right and left bracket keys respectively, but you can tap the caps lock key, and that way you'll get the so-called precise cursor, which is going to be a cross like so, and then I'll just paint away. And that way the cursor doesn't get in your face is the idea. And it also works with other tools. For example, if I switch to the pen tool, I'm not going to see my pen nib. I'm just going to see the cross because I've got precise cursors going. If ever that happens to you and you don't want it to, just turn off the caps lock key and you'll see the pen nib like so. Now, a really great use for precise cursors, in my opinion, is in concert with the eyedropper tool. And so notice the eyedropper, it's a little hard to tell where the hotspot is. Every cursor has a hotspot that's only 1 pixel and nothing more. And in the case of the eyedropper, it's in the bottom left corner. But, exactly what is that? Whereas, because, it's got kind of a flat edge right there. Whereas if you tap the caps lock key, you're going to see this very precise target. And that way you know that is the color I'm getting. And then I'll turn off the caps lock key, and now I'll press the B key to switch back to the brush tool, and I'll paint some more of my lovely brush strokes. Now, I kind of like working with a hybrid where you're seeing the cross inside the cursor, and to get to that, it's a preference once again. So on a PC, go to the Edit menu. On the Mac, go to the Photoshop menu, drop down to Preferences, not nearly so low on the Mac, and then choose Cursors. Right there. And that way you have all kinds of options available to you, including precise if you want to switch things around so that the precise cursor is the way things are by default, and then if you tap the caps lock key you get the standard cursor. You can work that way if you want to by switching between these options. However, I'm going to go with this guy right here, show crosshair in brush tip. And that way you can see, notice there's a crosshair right there. Before there wasn't, see that little preview, and now there is. And you can play around with these others as well. Other cursors, not the brush tool, or not brushes, that is to say, because it doesn't have to be the brush tool. It could be one of the other brushing tools inside the software. But those other cursors could be set to precise. For example, your pen tool and your eyedropper, for example, if you'd like them to be precise all the time. I'm not sure I want to, so I'll just switch that back to standard and click OK. And now notice I have a little cross hair inside my cursor. Now I can press and hold the Alt key for a moment to get the eyedropper on the fly, the standard eyedropper in my case. And I'll lift a dark shade of blue down here. And now if I release, I can paint with that dark blue like so. And I'm always aware of where the center of my cursor is because I have that crosshair. Thing 6 is actually a couple of things in the layers panel, specifically badges that may be associated with layer masks, and then these filtering options right here. And so let's say I want to mask this layer of black, this solid color layer, and I'm going to do so using the elliptical marquee tool, just because it's a lot of fun. And so I'll draw these kind of circular shapes here just by shift dragging, and I'm going to draw a smaller one down right. And now let's convert these selection outlines into a layer mask by clicking on the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers panel. And there they are, except that they are covered by the badge. The final circle, this little guy right here, is covered by this dopey badge, which is there to alert us to the fact that this is a layer mask, which we already know. That's not in question. And so no sooner did this feature come out, this has been one of the shortest lived features inside Photoshop, then people complained very loudly, and they came up with the preference setting Adobe did for turning it off. The problem is it's not in a typical location. Instead, here in the Layers panel, you click on the hamburger right there, and you choose Panel Options. And that's going to bring up this guy, and it says final checkbox. By default, these days, it should be turned off so that we're not seeing those stupid badges. I don't know why they just didn't get rid of the feature. Nobody wanted it. And click OK. And now, see, now the badge is gone, and I can see that final little circle right there. Next, let's turn our attention to these filtering options. Now, I'm not talking about filters under the filter menu. These aren't effect filters. These filter what you're seeing inside the layers panel. So for example, if I click on this icon, I will see just the pixel layers like so, and all the other ones are hidden. And then I'll click again in order to bring all the layers back. Now, if you never use these filtering options, you can hide them to save a little room on screen, and you do that, click on the hamburger icon once again. Notice the menu changes. That's really cool, I think. And then filter options, not animation options, but this guy right here, filter options, and then choose hide. And those filtering options will go away. So you have a little more room on screen. And there's your blend modes now at the top, like in the old days. However, here's the thing. You got to remember you did that, because if one day you're like, you know, whatever, I want to be able to filter what I see in a layers panel. What happened to those very useful options? Well, then click hamburger, that is, once again. Choose filter options and choose show. And they will come back. Now we're going to talk about the transparency grid. And not so much how to hide it, because it's already hidden, as you can see right now. That's just a function of like putting a layer in front of it. However, I want to show you how to customize it, because after all, if I bring back that mask we had just a moment ago, notice that the text, the white text in particular, is really illegible because we're seeing it against this very busy white and light gray transparency grid as it is by default, which I don't like. I don't approve of the default setting at all. And so if you want to change it, here's what you do. It's really easy and it will serve you well. Go to the edit menu and choose preferences. Once again, on the Mac, you go to Photoshop menu, choose preferences, not so low in the menu. And then you choose this guy right here, transparency and gamut. And we will be discussing color gamut in just a moment. But what you want to do is change your grid colors to shades of gray, in my opinion, but not something with that much. Look at that in the background. It's just too much contrast. It's alarming, actually. Irritates the eyes. And so what I recommend you do, or at least what I do, here's what I do. I click this second gray swatch and I change it to 54%. Because that way these two checkerboard colors are very similar to each other. We still get a checkerboard pattern. That's great. But it's just that it's something where we can easily see white against this pattern. And other colors show up well as well, except for your medium grays, which how often do you have an image full of medium gray as opposed to white? Anyway, next what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the grid size to large. That's what I like to do. I think it works well with large screens and, of course, for presenting things. And I'll click OK, and now I have this much better transparency grid. Now let's talk about hiding and showing ruler guides, custom ruler guides, the grid, and the pixel grid, all of which are different than each other, require different keyboard shortcuts that you should know about. And so I'm going to go up to the view menu and choose show, just so we can see all these extras here, two of which are grid and guides. And so these involve keyboard shortcuts that you may or may not know, but I really do think you should assign them to memory. They're just control on the PC or command on the Mac, semicolon for guides, and single quote for grid. And by the way, on an American keyboard, US keyboard, they're right next to each other to the right of the L key. L is in lasso. And so before you get to the enter key. So they're right in a row, and you just have to remember them. That's all, if you will. And I'll show them to you, because this image contains custom guides. And I usually just go ahead and turn them off when I'm, doing a presentation or something. I've also had circumstances where you turn something into somebody else and they take a look at your image and they're like, what's with all these cyan lines in here? So I try to, keep them hidden when I think any confusion is going to occur. But what I was doing, I just pressed Control semicolon, Command semicolon on the Mac, and that made them come up on screen and then go away. And for the grid, you would press the next key over. So Control or Command quote. is basically what it is. And you get this grid here, and you can change the size of the grid from preferences. You can look into that on your own if you use the grid. And then you just press that keyboard shortcut again in order to make them disappear. The pixel grid is something entirely different. So let's say I press and hold the Z key for the zoom tool for a second, and I just start dragging in like so. And then after I'm done, I'll release the Z key, because that's a spring-loaded tool. And now you're seeing the pixel grid. So anytime you zoom in past 800%, I think on most screens, it's 1200 on others. It depends. But anyway, you're going to see this grid. If you don't like the grid, oftentimes I don't, to hide it, it's just a standard extra. So you press Control H or Command H on the Mac. And then to bring it back, you press Command or Control H once again. And that's all there is to Guides Grid and the Pixel Grid. Ooh-wee, at Thing 9, we have a couple of commands, Proof Color and Gamut Warning, that serve a purpose, but if you accidentally invoke them, they're going to altogether change the appearance of your artwork. And so I'm going to switch over to this guy right here, which is from a couple of weeks ago. We're seeing a bunch of HSB swatches. Actually, saturation and brightness are cranked up to 100%, so we're just seeing different hue values at full intensity, and we're looking at them in the RGB space, but these are colors that wouldn't stand a chance of printing. And so if you wanted to kind of get a sense of how they would print, they're not going to print at full intensity like this, you would go up to the View menu and choose this command, Proof Colors, which serves a purpose, but it's a little diminished over time. Unless you print on a regular basis, and I mean commercial reproduction, you actually work with a print house, then this command is not something you want, but it does have a keyboard shortcut. So notice my colors. Just look at all those color swatches. See how they just diminish like crazy? Now, you might not have really seen it happen that well. So I'm just going to kind of indicate this green right here. And then if I press Control Y to turn proof colors off, it gets all bright. Isn't that amazing? And that's because in RGB, it looks great. Here, this guy looks awesome in RGB, but if I were to print commercial reproduction once again in CMYK, then it gets very drab indeed. And what's great about this command is that you can change proof setup. So you can change whether you're looking at the working CMYK space or you just want to see the black plate by itself or the CMY plates by themselves. You could do that if you like. So you can get a sense of how the image is going to print if you do a lot of commercial reproduction. Once again, if you don't and something like this happens, try to remember that there's this command right here that you can turn off in order to bring your colors back. Worse is that other command. Is it worse? Yes, it's worse, because I don't really think it serves that much of a purpose. Gamut warning is going to show you colors that are out of the CMYK gamut. And that's going to be everything in this graphic. Notice that every color that isn't going to print properly is now coded in gray by default. And so only like 4 yellows are going to print properly, and that's it. I'm going to print properly as well. I don't have any gray on me except my hair, of course. But if something like this happens where all of a sudden you get gray and you got a lot of scrapey grays going on inside the image, just remember there's this command right here that's got that keyboard shortcut that you don't want to touch, right? If nothing else, these commands should not have shortcuts, in my opinion. And so if you want to do yourself a favor, you could turn those shortcuts off using the keyboard shortcuts command. But otherwise, just bear in mind that these two features, proof colors and gamut warning, do exist inside Photoshop. And now for the most exciting Thing 10 blend mode previews. Now this is a preference setting of sorts. However, it's a different kind that is kind of top secret, actually. There's this special file that you can create called PsUserConfig text, and you can put different things in it. Mostly, it's pretty propeller head stuff. It's like, you know, how you're controlling the GPU and the cache and that kind of stuff. Not stuff I'm going to go into. But this one thing is really cool. So imagine that we're working with a couple of different images, the fish right here and the mountains in the background. And now I want to change the blend mode assigned to the fish in order to blend these guys together. Now notice that they flash as we go. Multiply looks good. Color burn looks ridiculous. Linear burn looks pretty good. And by the way, this is a great feature, in my opinion. The fact that you can actually preview blend modes on the fly. There's hard light. there's vivid light and so forth. And that way, you can try before you buy. But problem is, let's say you're trying to show this feature to some folks and you don't want it flashing all over the place, or you just don't like the flashing. You just happen to know blend modes well enough where you don't need to see these previews. Then you can turn them off if you're so inclined. This one's going to look like something anyway. In any event, I'll just go ahead and escape out of there. And let me show you what you do. You go ahead and create this file, just using a text editor, right? And this would be the name that you give the file. The contents of the file are live blend modes, all run together, 0. And in fact, here is that file. So this is all it contains. That's all you have to enter. All run together. Same, the caps, everything needs to be this way, right? And 0 means it's getting turned off. And then you want to call the file PsUserConfig text. Now, the tricky part is putting it in the right location, which under Windows, what you need to do is bring up a File Explorer window and then, tap inside the path. Right? The path at the top of the window, and you enter this text exactly. So get it right. I hope you can see it. It's %appdata% / on the PC is the way you work. Adobe / Adobe Photoshop, whatever the current version number is. It's 2024 for me. / Adobe Photoshop, same thing, settings. Now on the Mac, it's a little easier, I suppose. You go to the Macintosh Finder, the low-level Finder, right? And you go to the Go menu and choose Home, and then you return to the Go menu and choose Go to Folder. And you enter this string right here. It'll ask you to enter a string. And this is the path, / / this time, library / preferences, and then just / / again, Adobe Photoshop 2024 settings. If you're working with a more recent version of Photoshop, then you'll enter that version instead. And then what you do after you get done copying this file into this location is you go up to the file menu and choose exit here on the PC. You choose the quick command on the Mac. And the good news is you got to restart the program. In other words, the good news now is that you're going to save all those preferences we changed. So the appearance of the transparency grid, for example, the fact that the rich tooltips are off, and all that junk. And then, of course, you want to restart the program, which I've done, by the way. And so once again, I've got my fish set against the mountains, the snowy mountains right there. And now I'll change the blend mode. And notice as I work through these blend modes, I am not previewing them. And so if that's a way you want to work, this is how you pull it off. And so I'll just go ahead and go with difference, let's say, for this trippy effect right there. That PsUserConfig file, there's one more really great thing you can do with it, as I explain at patreon.com/deeknow. And then go to deek.com and sign up for my newsletter, not to mention like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. I'm Deke McClellan. This is Deek Now.